Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Prog Will Find a Way podcast. I'm Jonathan Block.
And I'm Jay Valade.
And we hope everybody had a very lovely Thanksgiving for those out there who celebrate that holiday. And today, kind of continuing our journey through the bands, we figured we'd spend some time talking about Genesis because they have, like so many other bands, unfortunately come to I'm not going to say unceremonious end because they actually went out with a bang of sorts, as big of a bang as I guess they could have given everything. So we thought we would just kind of talk a little bit about the band, kind of how we got into them, and maybe talk about the last tour and whatever things come up. I think we should probably say, though, we were debating when Selling England by the Pound was released in the last episode, and we discovered that it was in fact released in 1973.
Correct.
The exact date,
October 13th.
October 13th. So not a lot of props today. Have some classic Genesis books. This is the second Armando Gallo book. There was one before this. This is the From One Fan to Another. I just picked these up in the travels. And I used to have a lot more hard, Genesis albums and this and that, but I fly lean these days. So we want to start? Like, how did you first, do you remember where and how you first heard Genesis?
Yeah, when we talk about my prog past, Yes was the first, right? And then so from that, I kind of branched out and started to listen to different other prog bands. But I think what was happening at the time was I think I got Duke first.
Oh, Duke, yes. 1980.
Right? Yeah. So it would have been Duke and then there were three. But I think it was Duke, and then there were three.
Okay, so
because I was
working backwards.
I was working backwards.
Obviously, there was no forward to work at that point.
Well, and then Phil Collins, of course, had his giant face value hit. And then that kind of just put him, put them more in the public eye than before. So then I started to delve. I was getting the albums as Abacab and as they came out. But Duke was the first one that I bought, and they were a slow burn for me. I didn't like jump right in, and I liked the singles songs. Yep. I liked the Behind the Lines and Misunderstanding and what was the
Turn It On Again.
Yeah, Turn It On Again.
Follow You, Follow Me.
Yeah. Right. But the rest of the stuff took a while for me to warm up to. I think because it was it was just a little bit I don't know, quieter.
Right.
Quieter than the stuff that I was gravitating towards.
Less aggressive.
Yes.
Kind of
a little more
symphonic, right? Well,
yeah.
It's sometimes
right, which is why I liked Behind the Lines and Turn It On Again better. Yeah. Right. I was like, oh, this is
a little more
what
straight
I like,
ahead.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the balance of those albums, some of it was really mellow, like Duchess and all those songs. So then slowly but surely, I started to get into I found out that Peter Gabriel was in the band. This is before the internet, where you're just, you're just finding stuff out by reading things in the music magazines or whatever.
And it was worse than that because there were not a lot of people around that were into prog.
Correct.
So it's not like you could just go to your neighbor and say,
but Genesis was still doing
They were doing
business.
They
were huge. And then Phil Collins became this megastar, which opened everybody else's eyes up to Genesis even more.
Yep.
And then I got, I went backwards, and then I got the Peter stuff later. But Selling England by the Pound was my Peter go-to album.
Okay, yeah. And an album.
Right?
What an album.
That was it. And then I continued to listen to Genesis through their career, but I think I kind of stopped at the We Can't Dance album.
Yeah.
And I never got Calling All Stations with the different lead singer. And
Ray Wilson, yeah.
So, and then unfortunately I never saw them live, but I've, as we've discussed before, I did just watch The Last Domino documentary, which was very interesting, and it was kind of a bittersweet send off for them. But they sounded really good.
Yeah, his son can play drums. That's for sure.
And then they just watching Phil on stage sitting in the seat, he sounded good, but it's a different experience. I think
it is a different experience for sure. And I think that his son is. I saw some videos with his son toured with Phil. I think Phil's last tour, and he was really good. But he definitely did his father justice. And there were some points where you saw Phil turn around and just look like, nice. But yeah, he can obviously still sing. But yeah, it's a different kind of experience. I mean, I saw Genesis not a lot, but I saw the Duke tour, and then they toured for Abacab, and then the Three Sides Live tour. Those were the only tours I saw. But
that was the stuff I was. I mean, that's
amazing.
when I was in.
Oh, me too.
Genesis. It was getting Abacab, getting Three Sides Live, getting I just didn't have the opportunity to see them.
Yeah, and they were all good shows. And they played Supper's Ready during the Three Sides Live tour, which was.
And then I remember when the Genesis album with the blocks on the front came out. I love that album too.
Yeah.
Except there were a couple missteps for me on that album, but in general, I really like that album.
Yeah, it's funny.
It came out the same day as 90125, so it was really funny, and I was really mad at the time because Atco or Atlantic, whatever, raised the prices on like just those albums. I went to the record store, everything was like $8.99, and that was like $9.99. I'm like, why is that more expensive? It's like they're starting.
They're squeezing, man. They're squeezing. But yeah, big day for Prog.
It was.
Yeah. I don't
know.
For
the resurgence.
Yeah, for the resurgence. Yeah, that album was pretty good. That was the you can't use, I hate to use the word sellout because you could say they sold out way before that, you know?
It was more consistently radio friendly.
Right. Yeah. But there were some really, really good straight ahead. Like I love that song, Just a Job to Do, it's like, cause it just sounds like it's like the three of them, and it's just very like, just upbeat, but to your point, like it's a lot more in your face. In the instrumentation once they, kind of ditched, I guess, the old school synths. I heard Genesis in bits and snatches through the years. It's funny, like, when we grew up, you watch a lot of TV, right? So, you can only watch this much TV or this or that. But in my house, like, yes, they did that. But for some reason, we had a lot of radios around, like portable radios and that. And my parents could care less. I could sit around and listen to the radio all day, and I never heard anything about it.
Right.
So I always had a radio from 4 or 5, because like I said, we always had these little transistor radios, like there were this, or my brothers must not have been in, and then I don't know, my father must have gotten them somewhere because they always came home, or tape recorders or stuff like this. So I was like 4 or 5 listening to FM radio, so I would hear whatever was being played at the time. But Genesis was not. When I think back to like the things we were talking about in the other episode of the 50th anniversary, like Yes. And so I remember hearing Roundabout, when it came out in the single version. That's probably the first Yes thing I heard. And ELP, I'm sure I heard Lucky Man, but there wasn't a lot of then it was From the Beginning. It was not the Prog, even in FM, right? In FM, it wasn't. And for Genesis, it was the first thing I probably ever heard was I Know What I Like. I'm thinking that was probably, I Know What I Like. I remember hearing, because the song that made me kind of be like, was Lamb Lies Down. That intro, that keyboardy intro. I remember hearing that. And then that once Gabriel was gone, they would get played a lot. Like even Trick of the Tail, I remember hearing 3 or 4 of those songs, but I wasn't into them the way I was into, like, I got into from a Prog perspective, I got into like ELP heavy first, and Jethro Tull and Crimson. That was like it. And I got into Genesis later. The Genesis album that kind of really made me go, oh yeah, I like this band, was Seconds Out. My brother got Seconds Out. And because that was like a greatest hits, but you know, and I had not heard, other than those tunes on the
Snips.
radio,
Yeah.
I hadn't heard a lot of them. And like you said, there wasn't a lot of information out, and certainly at that age, I didn't know. Oh yes, Peter Gabriel was in the band, and he left in 1974, and then or five, and then Phil Collins took over. Right. It was like, oh, is it the same guy singing? Oh, whatever, it sounds good, you know. And so I really liked it. And then I got Wind and Wuthering, and it was the winter, and like that is such a winter album, and it was like it just fit the thing. And then I got the successive albums, but even in those times I was like, oh, they're kind of like, you know, Your Own Special Way, and then it was Follow You Follow Me, and then to your point, you know, like Duke, I remember when Duke came out, it was like, oh, and it was that sound from that era, whether it was Tormato or The Wall or that, it was all this kind of cold, they just have this cold quality to it. I love Duke, you know, and even like I got into like I'd never looked at it like, oh, that's a poppy song or that's this. It wasn't until the Shapes album where I was like, oh, okay, they're getting even Abacab with, you know, Who Done It and this other stuff. But it was balanced by like Me and Sarah Jane, you know, which was an amazing tune, or the Dodo Lurker Suite, the whole thing. So
it's kind of funny because they do straddle the fence a lot. And particularly when Phil Collins became this mega star.
But Mike Rutherford's actually the person to blame, because Your Own Special Way was a Mike Rutherford song, and that's the first. But it's funny, it's not really, because then if you go back even to the early albums, like on Nursery Crime, you know, Harlequin, and then like, you know, More Fool Me on Selling About a Pound, they always had these quieter ballady type ripples, you know, but amazing song.
But it's funny, it seems like those earlier songs, like if you had Ripple is like this slow build song. It's very proggy.
And you got that Steve Hackett guitar in there, and the strings and the back, you know, the keyboard, the Mellotron, and everything swelling in the background. Yeah, it's just a different sound.
Yeah, if they did a truncated 3-minute version of that, it would have ended up on like the later album, and it would have been this nice ballad kind of song that they did.
But I remember We Can't Dance, but I didn't really listen to it. I bought a single, and I thought the best song that they released from that era was on it, so I never got the album. On the Shoreline. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
Yeah.
Oh, what an amazing freaking song. And it's funny, I recently read a thing with Tony Banks, and he was saying something about, they were talking about some of the songs that made on that album, and he's like, and you know, On the Shoreline is probably one of the best things we ever did, but for some reason we didn't put it on. I'm like, yeah, exactly. I don't even know some. I mean, there's a lot of kind of poppy songs on that. I just never paid attention. I mean, at least they didn't come back and try to do another studio album. Beyond the, I mean, there's actually a few really cool songs on I
Can't Dance, or
no, the one after that, the
Calling All Stations,
like Alien Shores is a great song, and Shipwrecked, I think, is a great tune too. I thought there were some good tunes. I think that,
truthfully, I never listened to it.
You know, there was, I'm not going to call it perverse, but there was something about, you know, bands like, okay, you get somebody and let's see what you can do, right? And they never really gave it a go. I can't blame them. It's like you're used to being at one level, and then, do you really want to go through it again? And they were like, no. I don't know. It sounds like Mike Rutherford would have. It sounds like it was a Tony Banks, like, yeah, it's just not.
But they've also had their own, I mean, not as much Tony from a pop standpoint, but Mike and the Mechanics and Phil's solo career.
Well, I mean, none of them can. Yeah, I mean, Tony's has kind of always been the odd one.
Well, and then he did more orchestral stuff.
Right, he's been on a lot of that orchestral stuff.
Solo albums that were, you know, he had that one that had Still, I guess it was called. With Fish was on it.
Yeah, he went through. He went through. You know, Bank Statement. There's a whole bunch of different albums where he was trying to be popular, and he's very kind of, you know. One thing I've always loved about him, and he's just very, you know, he's self-effacing as he's like, yeah, you know, that was kind of its time, but I'm very happy doing orchestral music now, and you know, his name's on everything, but he's doing fine.
Yes, I think you are correct.
I'm not concerned about Tony Banks not having a successful solo career from a financial perspective, because he's making very nice money on the Genesis. Do they sell their catalog?
I believe they did as well. I think they're all doing it.
I think they're all doing it. Yeah. It's go for it, if you can get the money, you might as well. I mean, I totally understand it, because if you're I mean, as a parent, like, you wouldn't wish that on your child, to have to manage that stuff, or even if you have people to manage it, to pass it down, like, oh yes, I have this, like, think about Bob Dylan. I have at least 50 kind of key songs that are bringing in tons of money on a daily basis. There's a lot that goes around into managing that, right? So it makes a lot of sense to try to capitalize on that, but anyways,
but then over the course of time, I've gone back and I got those square boxes with all the CDs.
Oh, right, and the DVDs. Yeah. That was
I got the,
and of course, who can forget 1976 tour with Bill Bruford?
Bill
Bruford. And that's
where he made it, the full circle.
The only person that's played with every prog band. King Crimson.
Yes, Crimson and Genesis. And UK. I mean,
UK. The only band he was missing was Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Bruford.
And Bruford.
Bruford, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, and Palmer. Well, they could actually do that. They could. Right. But one of those songs is memorialized from that tour on Seconds Out Cinema Show. Is the Bruford version.
Oh,
yeah, on Seconds Out. Yeah, everything.
And
else
then wasn't on Three Sides Live was one of.
On Three Sides Live,
the fourth side.
The fourth side in the UK was 3 live tracks. Fountains of Salmassus.
I don't remember.
It Watcher of the Skies. That's what has. Oh, and One for the Vine. So both of those have Daryl Sturmer and Chester Thompson on it. But the last track, which was they did an instrumental. They did. And it's the way they ended that movie too. They did instrumental version of it.
Okay.
No, I'm screwing it up. I take it back. They did it, and they went right into an instrumental version of Watcher of the Skies. Okay. So the way that it ends, like Tony Banks would come in with the mellotron underneath, and it would just transition into a short version of Watcher of the Skies
with Bruford on it.
With Bruford on it, yeah. So that, and then of course in the U.S. we got the the Paper Late, Evidence of Autumn, Me and Virgil. And Vancouver, one of those, like, just the random songs that are so out of place
that they just
pulled
them all together. And put
because
them on
some of those songs, there were.
Was it the Spot the Pigeon EP?
Yeah, which I actually liked. Even Pigeons is a very funny song. It's a cool song. Inside Out is a little overbearing. Steve Hackett talks about how, like, that should have made Wind and Wuthering rather than What Gorilla. But anyways, I like Wind and Wuthering. Very, very good album. Genesis, though, is one of those bands, prog bands, though, well served by compilations, probably overserved, and videos. There's actually a number of videos now over the years, and we talked about it a few episodes ago, the Midnight Special. But if you go on, all those movies that were on those box sets, the Belgium TV one, the Shepperton, whatever, Shepperton Hall or Farm or whatever it is, the 72, 73 ones. There's a number of that up there. The Bruford, that 1976 one.
That short film,
yeah,
right?
that short film.
That was a cool little.
Yeah, and there's also, like, when and then there were some live things. So that one thing I noticed a lot of Genesis, and also the show that I loved, because it was that time when we were really into Genesis, and it was broadcast on the radio, and during the Duke tour when they played that small, they did it at the beginning of the Duke tour, some part of it, they did a tour in the UK or around London of small places, and the Lyceum was one of them. And that's like, they've released that on something.
I'll have to look.
But it was a video too, and the video's out there, and it's the Duke show. It's just great. But because they did the Duke suite, they would do the Duke suite. So they would do Behind the Lines, Duchess, guide vocal, turn it on again, and then Duke's Travels and Duke's Ends in the middle of the show. It was just an amazing, you know, I was 14 or something,
Yeah.
15, like I was so into them. And I remember it coming on the radio, like they, you know, it was coming, and set the tape deck up and, you know, play that.
Those were the days, setting the tape deck up, getting it ready to go.
Yeah, on the
and trying
air,
to cut
off,
the commercials
off the air,
out.
yeah, off the air. But yeah, Genesis was probably one of the first bands that I got heavily into. Like I liked the other bands, but because it was like an album a year, and there was a consistency about them, as opposed to, like I said, I was very much into ELP, but it was like after Brain Salad Surgery, all of a sudden they're gone for a few years.
Yeah.
Then you get Works, which was a lot to handle, you know. There's good stuff on it, but it was a lot.
Yeah.
And then that was it. I mean, Works 2 was just
the odds and sods.
And then Love Beach, and it was a chore to find the good stuff. Whereas Genesis, you know, okay, you know, Wind and Wuthering. Oh, and next year, and then Steve Hackett's gone. There's a live album, and then the next year and then there were 3, and then the next year it's Duke, and then it's I mean, it's year after year after year.
They were very consistent.
And it was just like very, very consistent. And it was like there was that period too where like Yes was, and Jethro Tull was, you know, and it was like, and then all of a sudden it came to the late 70s, and they all start slowly falling off, and they're, you know, or changing, I guess is the better way, because it's
the Yes thing was they had the Relayer thing, and then they did their solo album,
right.
So you got
those
momentum.
5.
But when you think about it, I mean, we're talking about the difference of like a 3-year gap or 2.5 year gap, which is in today's record release is like a blip.
It's nothing. It's so funny that the amount of
but
stuff
back then it was like you could not wait till the next album came out,
and how much they stuffed into those few years. You know,
it's incredible.
It's unbelievable that, and you couldn't keep that up, right? They all just started to peter out around the same time. You know,
because they were touring. Album, album.
Although petering out isn't like, you know.
No, Genesis, I don't think
they petered out.
They called it quits, but they didn't like.
No,
they didn't lose popularity. If anything, they just kept building
going
on
up and up,
building on.
And then you got this, like, you know, Peter Gabriel. I remember seeing the Melt album in the. I remember it vividly because I had gone out to dinner with my parents or something. I was probably 12 or 13, and we went to Caldors afterwards. If anyone out there remembers Bradley's and Caldors, we were in Caldors, and so I went and looked in the record thing, and I saw that there, and I was like, whoa, Peter Gabriel, okay. And I'm like, I've heard that name before. And then I think by that point I knew he was in Games Without Frontiers. I
yeah.
It's
kind
of
funny.
That right up to the register, but yeah. So, and of course,
what color sticker was it? So you remember Caldor was all by the color of the sticker?
Oh, that's right. I don't remember that.
$3.99, $4.99.
This would have been a full, whatever
full
it was
price
at the time, because this was 81, so it would have just come out, and that was tough because I told the story in the last episode. I was talking about cutouts.
Yeah.
When you didn't have a lot of money. I mean, I bought a lot of 8 tracks. My parents had an 8-track player, and I had an 8-track player, and you could get those for $1.99 at like Woolworths or Graf Wadden, and no one would buy them. So I would get. I mean, like I had the King Crimson catalog, ELP. That's how I bought. Because you could, for the price of an album, I could get 3 or 4 of those.
Yeah,
you weren't thinking ahead like with the quality. This sucks.
And what's kind of funny with the cutouts. It was, you're looking for in 1979 or whatever, you're looking through the cutouts of albums that came out in 1976, and it's like that was so long ago.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean? Yeah.
It's like if I could ever find that one album, like I remember looking for John Anderson's Elias of Sunhill forever, and it was only 4 years old or something at the time.
Right.
But it was already a cutout because, back in those days, they didn't just keep making those albums because
one pressing and that was it.
Yeah.
Well,
particularly that with the book and the whole thing. I mean, it was like, forget it.
But then also they're putting out, bands are putting out an album a year. John Anderson's all over the place. It's it's Elias or it's a Yes album or it's Vangelis. It's like everywhere you turn, John Anderson.
Those were the days.
Seriously, right? It's just like, I mean, it's yeah, well, and bringing it back to Genesis, I mean, in the 80s, you couldn't, Phil Collins was
You couldn't
everywhere.
get away.
You couldn't get away.
Yeah.
I remember there was always sticks in my head this quote about, this Roger Waters quote about, he had this quote about Phil Collins. This is the ubiquitousness. I find the ubiquitousness of Phil Collins very annoying. That's the quote. I always thought that was hilarious. But it's true. He was everywhere, and of course, exemplified by Live Aid, right? You know,
yeah, he was everywhere, but then he continued being everywhere.
He did.
I mean, even after the Phil Collins. I mean,
did he do Tarzan or was that Elton John?
He did Tarzan.
Okay, what did Elton John do something?
Lion King.
Okay.
But
Jungle Themes, at least I got that right.
But no, the Tarzan stuff was fantastic for Phil.
Wow. Also, was at one point a very avid collector of Alamo memorabilia. He was like Phil was like the world.
I didn't even know what you're talking about. You're bringing us. Is that a band?
No, the real Alamo out in Texas. No, Phil Collins was like recognized and like had this insane collection of memorabilia. I don't know if he got rid of it. You don't hear much about it anymore. Maybe he had to sell it in one of his divorces. But he was well known. Like it was.
Really? That's so funny.
Yeah, it's funny though that you're like, what on earth are you talking about?
Looking at you with a blank stare.
Yeah. Phil Collins was a well-known collector of Alamo memorabilia.
There you go.
Or what the historical aspect of it. So yeah.
On that note. Well, so it is kind of sad that they, to wrap it up, the watching the Last Domino thing was as I said, bittersweet because I've always liked Genesis. I never did get to see them, but they they're all getting old. I know.
And they were one band. I have to tell you, when I'm looking at some of those clips and stuff, and it's like, it's still complex music. They're playing large places, and they kind of had it together really quick. I was like watching even some of those rehearsals. I'm like, wow, they're just, and thinking about it, Daryl Stuermer, when's the last time they all played together, and they're, like you said, they're not getting any younger. Tony Banks is sitting there in his, and they're just doing it. And it's like, yeah, okay. It's for them. I'm sure they played a lot of those songs so much, but it's still, only one little thing needs to be out of sync, and it's like,
and it's a train wreck.
Yeah, and it's a train wreck. But yeah, it's it'd be interesting to see what Phil's son does in the future, because it's interesting generational kind of thing.
Yeah,
where it's like Ringo Starr's son, right, playing with the Who now for so many years, Zach Starkey. It's really interesting to see. But
a lot of the rock stars kids are doing that kind of thing. I mean, they are
following in the footsteps.
They are following the footsteps, and maybe not in the same instruments,
right?
But Steve Howe's son is drumming for a bunch of people, and obviously Rick Wakeman's kids are.
Yeah, that's right. You can't everywhere you turn.
Yeah,
so it's good,
and they play for a lot of different people.
Right. Yeah,
I think Wakeman was playing for Ozzy or something.
Yeah, it's like they're going
Travis.
Yeah,
I mean, they're all over the place.
Yeah. So, that Prog pedigree runs deep.
Well, Prog will find a way
if you want it to. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next episode.